Okay, hello, welcome back. This is a review of Another Crab's Treasure. It came out, I was gonna say a couple weeks ago, but actually I think it's been like a month. What is time? I don't know. You may have heard of this game affectionately referred to as Crab Souls because that's what it is. It is a Souls-like game where you play as a crab, a hermit crab specifically, which makes changing the shells kind of your main method of changing how you play. Where in Elden Ring or Dark Souls, I assume, I've never played Dark Souls, you would change like your weapons and your gear and your like skill points and whatnot. This review will not have outright like story spoilers, but what you will see is you will see bosses on screen. You will see perhaps me using a skill that you can only get later in the game. You may see areas that are later in the game. I'm actually not done playing this game yet. I haven't beaten it yet. I feel like I'm getting close, but who knows? So I have no idea how far through the story I've gotten, but I have been playing for a couple weeks, so I've got to be getting kind of far, at least. As a rough guess, I would say that I'm probably over halfway through the game. So if you don't want to see anything, if you want to go in fresh, this is not the review for you. And no hard feelings if you want to just put it on the watch later list and come back when you're ready. But we continue on. I'm Savalian. I make videos about games, development, and creativity. And a lot of the footage that you're going to be seeing today is from my Twitch stream. So I'll plug that real quick. I stream on Twitch Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays from 7 Pacific to 9 Pacific, and that's in the evening. I'm not an early bird. I don't get up at 7 a.m. Some people do. I actually used to know someone who would get up at 5 a.m. to do a stream before work, which is, in my opinion, insane. But we're going to get into it, and I'm going to tell you all about Another Crab's Treasure and my experience with Souls games and how I am finding it. And a little spoiler alert, I'm really liking it, so this is going to be a positive review. So as I said, Another Crab's Treasure is a Souls-like, which means that it shares a lot of the game mechanics as Souls games. So FromSoft games, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, I think those are all of them. And kind of the basic premise is that the game is a combat-focused game. There are typically really big boss fights where either dodging or careful parrying is part of the combat. Learning how to time your dodges is extremely important in Souls-likes. And there are also some things that I don't like as much, which is that in addition to the combat being intentionally very hard, you also drop your whatever is used for leveling up, you drop it when you die. And if you die again before you pick it up, it's gone forever. So for people like me who are not really very good at Souls games, you end up losing a lot of experience and it makes it very hard to progress, but we'll talk about that later. That's kind of the core of a Souls game as I understand it, is this very specific kind of combat, the difficulty level, and this punishing mechanic where you just lose a lot of things when you die. And then typically where Souls games are very bleak and kind of gross, Another Crab's Treasure has changed it a bit, where you have this very colorful world. Your main character is this little red hermit crab. The ocean is blue and there's coral reefs and there's just a lot of vibrancy and color. And I really like that as a change to Souls games. Now, I'm not gonna lie, a lot of areas in Elden Ring are very pretty, but they still all tend to have that sort of grungy, everything's kind of dirty looking. Colors are not as bright as I would like personally. So I'm going to talk very briefly about my experience with Souls games, which is that I haven't really played any of them. I have not played Dark Souls, I have not played Bloodborne, but I have played Elden Ring. And I did not like it at all. I tried really hard. I paid friggin' $60 for it or whatever it was. I tried on 2 different occasions to get into Elden Ring. I even tried pulling in friends to help to see if that might make it better for me, but the multiplayer system built into Elden Ring is just very, very hard to use. You have to repeatedly call people back in when you die, and when, like me, you're not very good at it, you die a lot, and so all of this tedium really starts to add up. My biggest problem with Elden Ring was that I find this mechanic where you drop your experience on death to be needlessly punishing. And I know that there are going to be people who disagree, and whatever, that's fine. You can have different opinions if you want. But personally, I think from a game design perspective, you want the player to experience your game. And if you make it, either like a direct punishment or just a very risky thing to go out and explore and to try and attempt big new enemies that are interesting, then people are just not going to do it. They're not going to venture out if it's so easy to lose a lot of progress. And that was kind of where I was at with Elden Ring, was that I was so inexperienced with Souls games, I couldn't even get enough of the points to level up. And if I can't level up, I can't actually like get better. And you can say like I could get better at the technical aspect of the game, but I still find Elden Ring very difficult to visually parse. Everything's kind of the same color, and it's hard to tell what the bosses are doing. The timing is weird for me. It's just a lot of things that add up that made Elden Ring feel like prying my own fingernails off one by one. And I really wish I could have enjoyed it because I've watched playthroughs of other people playing through and finding the quests and experiencing the little bits of lore here and there, and I wasn't able to do it, and that makes me pretty sad. And as a game developer myself, I don't want that experience for my players. I don't really relate to the idea that, games should be a certain way to like earn clout, Like it feels like the Souls games are extremely hard and punishing just to sort of prove a point that they can be very hard and punishing, and I just don't really get that personally. But that is my experience with Souls games, was that I do not like them. I have not liked them. I've tried really hard to enjoy them and I haven't been able to. But you may ask, if you hate Souls games, why are you playing another Crab's Treasure? Um, because Aggro Crab, the developer of Another Crab's Treasure, made another game before this one called Going Under. And Going Under is an action roguelite where you work as an unpaid intern at a startup and you fight monsters in the sunken down companies that have literally gone under beneath the company that you're working at. And it was just delightful. It's a good game, and before that game, I did not like action roguelites. And in fact, I had tried to play Hades. I couldn't do it. I didn't enjoy Hades because I couldn't quite get the controls down. And it's, I don't really blame Hades for that, but it wasn't enough to keep me interested in progressing. Going Under, on the other hand, has this hilarious satire kind of story wrapped around the action roguelite, and it introduces you to the mechanics in a way that is accessible to people, I feel like. And then on top of it, and we'll talk about this for Another Crab's Treasure later, the developers of Aggro Crab share my opinion that games should not be hard just for the sake of being hard, and if it interferes with people being able to actually play the game, that's not a good thing. So they have provided in both Going Under and Another Crab's Treasure the ability to adjust the difficulty in a way that feels good to the individual player. So in Going Under, I was able to get through about half of the game on the default difficulty, and then I turned on just a little bit of assist. I think I just gave myself more health, if I remember right, and that was enough, and I was able to enjoy the whole game from start to finish without having to grind out, dozens of hours trying to learn how to play an action roguelite. But the developers built up a lot of goodwill. They built up a lot of trust in me. They are definitely good at creating a funny story, a funny story that I really enjoy personally. I know I've talked about Going Under's UI design before, but just the design of their games is so deep. Inspires me, it awes me, but like everything is crafted in their games, and it really feels very good. Just to notice all of these little things, all these little jokes, references, things that connect to the real world in ways that I don't even realize when I'm playing and then I figure it out later. Like the fact that all the characters are like corporate Memphis characters that real corporations use in advertisements. Anyway, this is not a video about Going Under. I know I've talked about it before. I will probably talk about it again. But we're going to talk about the crab game. At the start of Another Crab's Treasure, I feel like they set the vibes very well. It's kind of snarky, it's fun, it's cute and colorful. They start talking about, the oceans and how the creatures in the oceans are very resilient. And then you, as a hermit crab, get your shell repossessed because you didn't pay your taxes, because you didn't know what taxes were. And it's one of those things, and this is consistent throughout the story, where it's like it's a little bit too real, but it's still fun. It's still fun. We can laugh at it, even if we have to cry about our real taxes afterward. They take you through a little tutorial sequence where they teach you how to move throughout the world. They teach you how to fight, and then they eventually lead you to your first boss where you can get your first shell. And you actually don't need to go directly to the boss. And that's one thing I like about this game, is that it does have a story and a progression through the world. You can't literally explore the entire world from the beginning, as far as I know. I believe paths are like literally blocked off, but there's a lot you can wander around and look for. There's a lot of little mini bosses. I saw somebody play one of the mini bosses before they got their shell, and it was not something I could ever pull off, but they managed to do it, and it was just a fun little thing to say, like, I was able to do this, It's an extra hard challenge, and I'm glad that they were able to pull it off, because it's a fun little achievement that they have now. But I like the structure in Another Crab's Treasure, because that is also one of my bigger complaints about Elden Ring, is that, I don't necessarily need a game to hold my hand, but I tried to find a single quest in Elden Ring. I tried to find a reason for doing what I was doing. I tried to figure out like who all these people were and what was going on and why they were like this, and I just couldn't. Like, they made it extremely hard to engage with the lore. And I was able to eventually find one single NPC that I could interact with and get their kind of side of things. But it's too unstructured for me for a game like this. Like, when I'm fighting bosses, I want to know why. I want to know what they did, even if it's just little clues. And I don't even think, maybe some of the Elden Ring bosses have like voice lines, but I don't remember them, so I don't remember if they were giving some of that exposition in the fights. But it was kind of just like, go to this grungy castle and fight this grungy guy with 10 arms, and it didn't feel like I was learning anything, and it didn't feel like I was accomplishing anything, because I didn't know why these people had to die. And with Another Crab's Treasure, you start with a story, it points you in a direction, and it sort of pushes you towards the next thing. But you can always break free from that if you'd like to and do a little bit of wandering. One thing that there isn't really is side quests, which is fine. I just wanted to mention it in case anyone was thinking that it was a different experience than it is. It really is just the main story, but there's a lot of little things to find and jokes. The crab in the moist crack is my favorite character, I think. It's one of my favorite characters, at least, which you might encounter in your wanderings. So as you get into the game, you fight this first boss, and this is where I really started to learn Souls-like skills. Funny because I was able to defeat one boss in Elden Ring. It was Margit. I don't really remember the character's entire name, but it was like one of the main ones as far as I know. I know there's a lot of like optional guys just running around in Elden Ring, but this guy was kind of part of the main progression as I understand it. But because I didn't have the motivation or the interest to really play Elden Ring, I never learned how to do Souls games. Like I never learned the timings for dodging. I never learned like strategies of like how to get in there and attack. I still can't like parry. Parrying is, I think, a mechanic in Another Crab's Treasure. In fact, I don't even use my shell to block, which I'm starting to figure out now. But for almost all of my playtime so far, I have not really blocked any attacks just because I've got a lot of buttons to remember to press, and adding the block button feels a little bit overwhelming for me. And it hindered me in the story because I couldn't figure out how to get past a certain obstacle. So if that happens to you, if you're stuck somewhere and you're like, I don't know how to do this, try blocking and seeing if that might do it. I had to look it up basically because it wasn't even a thing that occurred to me. But because I trusted this developer, I trusted that they would make a good, enjoyable game, and also I knew that I could turn the difficulty down if I needed to, I was able to push through that first boss fight. I must have spent over an hour just fighting the intro boss, and I kind of got it. I kind of started to get a feel for the tells of which moves that the bosses are going to use, which is not a skill I've ever really had to work on. I played a lot of MMOs before, but it's quite different. And one of the biggest differences is that MMO bosses usually will telegraph their moves in a much clearer way. They're not as based on intuition or in subtle movements and good like reflexes. Mostly because they don't want MMOs to be so hard people can't play them, because that's their entire business model. But just having the options to reduce the difficulty, like having the options there, gave me the courage to push through it without even adjusting them, because I knew that even if I couldn't figure it out, I could still experience the rest of the game. Like I wouldn't have to just give up until I got good or whatever. Which is kind of how Elden Ring felt, which was that if I couldn't grind out a couple of levels to keep myself from dying, I had no hope of getting through the rest of the game. So there was that, and then there was also the promise of finding out what happens next in the story, because I did have a motivation for all of these fights, at least most of them. Some of the bosses were just kind of in your way, but most of them you had a reason to go there and a reason to get past them. After that first boss, we had to go through some areas with trash mobs, and this is where I started to doubt my resolve, and it's where I started to encounter a lot of things that I really don't like. And I'm sorry to say it, Aggro Crab, but there are some parts of this game that I found just really not very fun at all. Specifically in that early part of the game, when I'm still learning how to play, when I'm still leveling up, there's a section of the map that you have to get through where there's all these little platforms. There's all these little platforms. If you fall off the platform, you don't immediately die, but you do take damage, and then you respawn in a place that isn't super predictable. Sometimes you respawn like right where you fell, and sometimes it's slightly different. And sometimes there are enemies like right next to you when you respawn. And there's also a lot of enemies on these tiny little platforms. This is a game all about dodging. You dodge stuff. I guess I could have been blocking, but I wasn't. So in my mind, this section was impossible to do. I fought my way through a couple of times, and then I was just like, screw it. I'm gonna just run through and I'm not gonna stop until something physically stops me. And I still died a few times using that strategy, but it did work a lot better. The problem is, if you don't fight the trash mobs in between the bosses, you don't have any of the microplastics that you need to level up. And if I didn't mention it, the currency that you use to level up and also to buy things is microplastics. Because a lot of this game is commentary on like the pollution of the ocean, in kind of a satirical, fun but still sad kind of way. So microplastics are like the souls or the whatever it is in Elden Ring. It should be rings, but it's not apparently. So I had a really rough time in most of the trash mob areas. You know, this was consistent throughout the game where I just really didn't want to be between bosses at all. It was not a fun thing. And the biggest issue for me was just the number of enemies and the camera. There is a camera that targets which enemy you're attacking, and if you don't target an enemy, it's really hard to aim your attacks. So you kind of need to have that targeting on, or you just miss. Well, I just missed all my attacks. But when you have multiple enemies and you're focusing on one of them, you can't see the ones behind you. And sometimes, because we are in the ocean and you know, there's swimming and there's big jumps and sponges that you can leap on, sometimes the enemies will go upward in the scene. Uh, uh, and at that point you really can't see much of anything. Or if they get shot across, you know, a patch of ground, or if they get on the sponge and they go up, the camera gets really erratic trying to follow them, and it's very hard to see what's happening. And when you're trying to fight and you're trying to dodge and block and all that, um, it's hard to remember that you can untarget enemies, or switch. You can also switch. I've tried to do the switching. It's a little bit, there's a little bit of a delay for me. I don't know if this is just to smooth out the camera movement or what, but it seems like switching enemies is not as snappy as I'm expecting. And so it's kind of hard to make use of that feature in the middle of a fight. It's much easier to do enemies one at a time, but just in general, my most desperate moments in this game were when I was just trying to get through a bunch of platforms, where there's like seahorses throwing explosives at me or crabs just pushing me immediately off the edge. I don't know. It just wasn't fun. I hated it. And I got so frustrated that I just ran through, and turns out that's a viable strategy. It makes you a little bit underleveled for the next thing you do, but what I was able to do, and maybe this is a little bit cheesy, once I got through that next area, defeated that next boss, and got a couple of levels up, I went back to the previous area and used my new, stronger powers to pick up all the loot that I missed the first time. So I'm definitely going through the game slightly underleveled with this strategy, but at least they do let you go back and I can find all the loot. There's like some collectibles you can get, but in general, I struggled. I just like the boss fights. Just only put enemies in a boss arena and their bosses. That's my ideal Souls-like. And I did also, I don't know if I mentioned this, but after it was a while. It was after about like maybe 6 to 10 hours of playing. I did turn off the mechanic in the assist options that makes you lose your microplastics when you die. Because as I mentioned, it makes it really stressful to do any exploring. It makes it really stressful to encounter an enemy that you haven't seen. Because what if you can't get your microplastics back? Or what if you just make a mistake? Like one of the times where I lost like 5,000 microplastics, which was a lot at the level that I was at. It was like almost a full level. And I just messed up some jumps when I was trying to get through a cave back to my microplastics. So it wasn't even an enemy that got me. It was the platforming, which I famously hate platforming. I hate it so much. I'm not good at it. It's hard to line things up, especially in a 3D space. And I did get defeated by platforming pretty handily because you're platforming and you're trying to not get attacked and you're trying to avoid hidden enemies. Some of them will hide. So platforming did defeat me in Another Crab's Treasure, technically speaking. It defeats me in most games. But I think I've covered on most of the main mechanics and most of my main thoughts of Another Crab's Treasure. So just as a little review, a little recap, in general, I find the game delightful. There's also a lot of silly little jokes that I haven't spoiled here. Okay, we'll spoil one just because it made me laugh so hard. Thing. Prawn. It's a prawn shop. Get it? Alright, we'll see that tomorrow. CND Pharmacy. CND's nuts got him. But there's all kinds of little like visual gags. The crabs that you talk to sometimes have punny names. Sometimes they don't. Or at least it's not a pun that I understand. There's a couple of references in some like collabs. For example, there's like a Cult of the Lamb skin that you can unlock for the main character, which is fun. But it's just a delightful game, and you know, most impressively, I'm starting to feel like I'm kind of good at fighting. Maybe I'm just leveled up, maybe I'm just stronger, but I feel like I'm really getting the hang of this dodge and hit Souls-like combat style, and that feels really good. Like it's really encouraging to me because of how much I struggled with Elden Ring to actually feel like I'm getting better at the game. Because it did feel like very hopeless. It didn't feel like I was learning in Elden Ring. It didn't feel like I was getting further with more attempts. It literally just felt like I was getting repeatedly stomped on and not in a fun way. And so the fact that this game was able to create a situation where I could learn and get better and grow and also experience this fun little world and these silly characters and these jokes. Um, I love it. I'm not surprised. I expected that this would happen because Aggro Crab just does such a good job. But you can get this game on Steam and I believe on some consoles as well. I don't know. I don't really play on consoles, but I would recommend it. I think it's a lot of fun. I think if you like Souls games, you will definitely like this game. And then if you don't like Souls games, you might still like this game. That's kind of the pitch I've been going with when people ask about how I'm enjoying Another Crab's Treasure. Because I'm gonna probably say that this is the Souls-like that got me into Souls-likes, because that's how they do it. They really get you into a genre that you're not comfortable in and make it a fun experience when they do it. So thank you to Aggro Crab for making such a great game. I am not affiliated with them at all. This is not sponsored. This is just a review of my own experience. In the comments, let me know, do you like Souls-likes, and have you played Another Crab's Treasure? Are you thinking about picking it up? Or if you don't have any experience with Souls games, let me know in the comments, what object would you want to have as your shell if you were a hermit crab? Just a silly little question. But if you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. Maybe think about subscribing to the channel because I'll be back soon with another video, and I hope to see you there. Bye-bye.
All of our lives
Whew.
are as sand beneath the tide. You'll see one.
Pollution scoured. Goodbye, beautiful queen.